We're learning the Sikha of Shabbos Parshas Vayishlach, Tavshin Nun Beis. The Sikha can be found in Sefer HaSichas Tavshin Nun Beis on page 155. The way we're going to do the Sikha is that we're going through the whole Sikha in English, but following along the full text, so that you could follow along line by line the whole Sikha inside. The Rebbe starts off the Sikha by saying that one of the special things of this Shabbos Kodesh starts already on Erev Shabbos, as the Razal tell us that someone that worked on Erev Shabbos gets to eat on Shabbos. So we eat on Shabbos from that which was prepared before Shabbos. So the Erev Shabbos was Tezvav Kislev, the day in which the moon is complete. That's the Shleimus, the completion of the moon, representing the Shleimus, the completion of the month of Kislev. Now, of course, this leads into Moitzoi Shabbos, from Erev Shabbos going to Shabbos and Moitzoi Shabbos. And Moitzoi Shabbos, we know, goes all the way to the third day of the week, is a continuation of Shabbos. And Yutes Kislev, the Chag HaGeul of the Alter Rebbe, the Chag HaChagim, the Yom Tov of all Yom Tovim, Rosh Hashanah, of Toras HaChasidus, is on Tuesday, which follows Shabbos. And a special Maila in this Kvias, which fits with the setup of the year of Yutes Kislev on the very first time, in the year Tov Kuf Nun Tes, as the Alter Rebbe said in his famous letters, that his Geula was on the day of Yutes Kislev. He said, Yom Gimel Shulchpal by Kitov, the day in which Kitov is said twice. When I was reading in Sefer Tehillim the pasuk of Pada V'Sholem Nafshi, why was he reading it then? Because as Tehillim is divided according to the days of the week, the kapitel that has Pada V'Sholem is in that section of Tehillim that's Shaykh to the third day of the week. So therefore, then Yutes Kislev was on a Tuesday, and automatically the Shabbos before it was Tezayin Kislev, as is the Kviyas in the year the Rebbe is saying the Sikh and Tavshin and Beis, and Erev Shabbos was Tezvav Kislev. Says the Rebbe, since all things, especially something as so important, fundamental in general, as Yutes Kislev, the Rosh Hashanah for Toras HaChasidus, of course everything is Ba'ashgacha Pratis and B'tachlis Adiyuk 100% accurate. It makes sense to say that there's a special connection between them, that is, that the Beracha for Yutes Kislev, that which enables and gives the power for Yutes Kislev, is coming from the Shabbos beforehand and from the day that we prepare for Shabbos, which was Tezvav Kislev, in which we have the moon being complete, representing the completion of the month of Kislev, as will soon be explained more. In order to explain this, the Rebbe first asks a question regarding the Chag HaGeula Yutes Kislev, Chag HaChagim, how it is different, and the Rebbe contrasts it with other Yomim Tovim. Pesach and Sukkot were set to be on the 15th day of the month. Pesach on the 15th day of Nisan, Sukkot on the 15th day of Tishrei, in which the 15th, as said before, is when the moon is complete. Now, what about Shavuos? And first of all, Shavuos is not set to a particular date. Which day in the month it's going to be, it's always the 50th day in the month, to the Omer. But when we do discuss which day in the month it's going to be, because sometimes it'll end up being the 5th, the 6th, or the 7th of Sivan, but at least it's the first half of the month, when the moon is growing, getting bigger from day to day, and the same thing would apply to the Yidden who count their months according to the moon and are compared to the moon, so it represents the time when they're growing and becoming bigger. Whereas Yutes Kislev, not only isn't it like the other Yom Tovim on the 15th day of the month, when the moon is full, but furthermore it's in the second half of the month, when the moon is in fact getting smaller and smaller every single day. Says the Rebbe, the same question, and even more so, is regarding the Yom Tov of Chanukah, that not like Purim, which Purim is on Yudalid and Tezvav of the month, depending on Purim or Shushim Purim, of course, where again, this is the time when the moon is full, but rather, Chanukah starts at the very, very end of the month, starting on Chav Hei Kislev onwards, where the moon is getting smaller and smaller until such time when it disappears and is hidden completely. Says the Rebbe in Seif Gimel, we could explain this by first discussing generally this idea of the moon getting smaller in the second half of the month and how this relates to Yidden that count their months according to the moon. But by first prefacing, since the first half of the month, the moon is getting bigger and bigger, the light of the moon is getting more and more. In the second half of the month, it's getting less and less. Seemingly, the way we would be counting when counting according to the moon, we should have technically been counting in the first half of the month, in a way ever increasing the numbers. So on day 1 of the month, it's number 1, then day 2, etc., all the way till the 15th, similar to the moon that's growing. And then in the second half of the month, we should have been counting down from the 15th to the 14th, all the way back to 1, as the moon that's going smaller. But not only aren't we decreasing in the number of days in the second half of the month, but on the contrary, we're actually adding every single day even more when comparing it to that day that was the fullest moon, the 15th day, and yet the very next day, where the moon is getting smaller and less, is now we're counting it as number Tezayin, number 16, which is one more than Tezvav. And the day afterwards, where we have even less of the light of the moon, that's the day of Yud Zayin, which is 2 more than the 15th, and so on. Until finally, we get to the last day of the month, when the moon is completely hidden and concealed, which is going to be either day 29 or day 30. That's the way we're going to count it, which is many numbers, and actually even double. 30 is even double than 15. Furthermore, says the Rebbe, in addition to the fact that we are adding, also in the second half of the month, in the numbers of the days of the month, we also look at the gematria and the various different hints that are in these numbers. Here too is ever increasing. So for example, the number Yud Zayin is the gematria of the word Toiv, which means good. The number Yud Ches is of course Chai. The number Yud Tes is the gematria of the word Bitoiv. The number 20 is, Chassidus explains, based on Kabbalah, that it's that the word Yud, the letter Yud, but what's written out fully is Yud Vav Daled, that is 20. Then we go to Chaf Aleph, 21, is based on the pasuk Ach Toiv Li Yisrael, only good for the Yidden. Ach is 21. The number 22 is hinted in the pasuk Becha Yevarich Yisrael. All the brachos are coming through you, Becha, which is 22. Chav Gimel is the gematria of Toivu. Chav Daled, based on a pasuk V'samti Kadkoid Shimshei Sayich, explained a lot in Chassidus what the significance of Kadkoid means, but it's a pasuk referring to the time of the Geula, when there'll be some very great Giluyim. The Chav Hei, based on the pasuk Koi, is Chav Hei, Koi Sevarchu Es Bnei Yisrael. Then we come to 26, which is of course the gematria of Shem Havaya. Chav Zayin is the idea of Zach, purity. Chav Ches is Koyach. And finally we come to 29 and 30. 29 are the days of a month, and 30 is when a full month, etc. In other words, every single one of these numbers is actually representing higher and greater ideas. The reason is, because since we are commanded that we always have to have Mailin B'Kodesh, and we're given the ability to always increase in holiness, especially, we should never be going down, and that's true the whole month, even the second half of the month. So after the moon is complete, of course, every single day we need to be increasing more and more. So now we need to understand even more so, what is the idea? What does it really mean that the moon is decreasing and becoming smaller and less light every single day of the month after it was full at the middle of the month? Seemingly the decreasing light of the moon would seem to be the opposite of Mailin B'Kodesh, and again, certainly we shouldn't be going down in holiness. So the Rebbe explains it in the following way. The Rebbe says the idea of the moon and the sun represent Mekabel and Mashpia, the moon being the recipient and the sun giving off the light. The moon doesn't have any light on its own, it's receiving all of its light from the sun, and the way it works is that first the moon is receiving a little bit of light. That's at the point by the Moilad Halavana where it's just going to be one little dot. Every single day it's going to be increasing more and more light that it's receiving from the sun, until finally on the 15th day, when you have the full moon, now it's complete, all of the light that it's getting, the moon is getting from the sun. However, says the Rebbe, since even when the moon got its full light from the sun, it's still on the level of makabel of the recipient, that's still not the ultimate shleimus, the ultimate perfection of the levana, to become exactly like the sun, not even to need to receive light from the sun. As it says, when Mashiach is going to come, the moon is going to be like the sun. Like before the time it was diminished, when at that point, there was Shnei Ma'oris HaGdolim, both the sun and the moon were the two great luminaries. Says the Rebbe, when the light of the moon is full, that it received from the sun, and now it became full, now we come to a higher level, that the moon is going to become like the sun, as in the pasuk, as we just said, and how does that happen? This is as a result of a revelation of a greater level, of something that's higher than both of them, something that becomes, again in the language of Chassidus and Kabbalah, it becomes a crown, one crown for both of them together, meaning something that's including both of them, that's higher, including both of them together. And this shleimus, this perfection of the moon, is going to be expressed in the relationship between the sun and the moon in the second half of the month, as we will explain. So the Rebbe says in Seif Hey, the explanation goes as follows. The reason why there's a difference between the first half of the month, that every single day the light is increasing of the moon, and in the second half of the month, which every single day the light of the moon is decreasing, is because in the first half of the month, the moon is getting more and more distant from the sun. The further it goes from the sun, the more we can get the light and see the light of the sun. In the second half of the month, the closer it's getting to the sun, the less and less light is coming from the moon towards us. The Rebbe explains the reason for this, because in the relationship between the mashpia, in this case the giver, the sun, and the makabel, the levana, the recipient, the moon, is in a way that when the recipient is standing very, very close to the mashpia, to the giver, then the recipient cannot be giving off its light because of its tremendous bittul, its tremendous nullification to receive everything, and therefore it cannot give off light. The further away it goes from the mashpia, now it too starts giving off light, of course that light that it received from the mashpia. Says the Rebbe, when the moon is getting closer to the sun in the second half of the month, it's not only for the purpose to get very close to the sun, what we call yichud shimsha v'siyara, that now they're completely aligned with each other, mashpia and the makabel, which is going to now result in the moila that follows. Again, by the moon first becoming smaller and smaller every day, and it's having more and more bittul. This is similar to a pasuk that we also relate to Rosh Chodesh. Ki yipoked Moshevecha, a pasuk said regarding David HaMelech, that because his seat is going to be empty, that's why he's going to be remembered. We apply that to the sun and the moon as well, that Dafka as a result of its diminishing, that's when it has the rebirth. So again, it's not only that it should be able to receive more hashpah from the mashpia, the v'kadata, which that's really a separate idea, which is mainly going to be relevant to the following month. So that's one way of looking at it. It's getting smaller now, but it's going to get closer to the sun, and then it will get more light from the mashpia. But the Rebbe says, really what's going on a deeper level is that it's getting closer to the etzem, to the essence that's higher even than the light of the sun. As quoted before, keser echad, one crown for both of them together. And this closeness, that it's actually getting closer to the etzem, is expressed in the fact that its light is getting smaller. Because oir, generally light, is a gilui, is a revelation from the etzem. And that is, that when the etzem generally is concealed, it's a concealment that's higher than revelation. It's beyond revelation. And only a tiny little light of etzem could express itself. And therefore, as the moon gets smaller from day to day, what it's really representing is that it's getting closer and closer to the etzem, to the essence that's higher than revelation, to a concealment that's higher than revelation. And again, as a result of that, the moon is going to become equal to the sun, because we're speaking about an essence that's higher than both of them together, as we said, keser echad l'shneim. To take it a step deeper and a step further, this rule that we say that the etzem, that the essence is concealed, and that the light only is that which is being revealed, that's of course in relationship to the outsider. That since we cannot receive the very essence, only a reflection and a light of it, so we call that which comes out oir, we call it light, because that's what's being revealed to us, and the etzem, the essence, we call helim, concealed and dark, because we can't see it. But if we look at it from the perspective of the etzem, of the essence itself, of course it would be the other way around. The light that's coming out, that's the darkness in comparison to the essence, which is the real brightest thing. From this we understand that the necessity in the light to become smaller in order to get closer to the etzem is only as long as the one receiving the light remains as a separate entity for itself. That's not able to receive the etzem, because as we said before, the etzem is remaining behelim. However, once it becomes one with the mashpia, he becomes like the mashpia when there's no separation between them. It's no longer mashpia or makabel, they become one. Then the very essence is begilui. Says the Rebbe, based on this, we can explain that when we speak about the light getting smaller and smaller in the second half of the month, that's only as far if we're speaking of the darga, of that level called oir. In other words, just a ray, just a reflection, and because it's getting closer and closer to the essence, which is higher than any sort of light. But it's not a miyut, it's not a diminishing of the gilui, of the revelation, because if we speak about the etzem, that's actually becoming more and more revealed. And how is that expressed? That's expressed in the fact that in the numbers of the month, which number represents, we're revealing, we're expressing, we're dealing with it. What are we doing? We're actually adding every single day. The 16th day, the 17th, the 18th, etc. through the Bnei Yisrael. Why are we adding every single day? Because what we're saying is there's more of the Isgalus of the Etzem, which is higher than the Isgalus of the Oir. Just to point out that here in the footnote in 22, the Rebbe says that even though in the moon itself it's not in a way of revelation, as we said before, on the contrary, it's getting smaller and smaller, but within Yidden, this is the idea that's expressed, that ultimately Yisrael v'kuchabrichu kol echad, that the Yidden become one with Hashem and becomes revealed, how rarely there's only aliyos rather than chas v'shalom saying that anything's diminishing. Says the Rebbe in Siva, this is specifically emphasized in Kaimas Yera Bashlomusa in the full moon of the month of Kislev. The month of Kislev, as we know, is the third month in the winter months, which corresponds to the third month of the summer months. The Chodesh of Matan Torah, the month of Sivan, the third month, is the month of Matan Torah. Kislev is the third month in the winter months, is the month of Matan Torah of Torah's HaChasidus. On Yutas Kislev, which is the Rosh Hashanah and the Matan Torah of Chasidus. What's the idea? It's known that Matan Torah is the day of the marriage between HaKadosh Baruch Hu, between Hashem and Knesset Yisrael. And how does that work? Again, it starts off in a way that first Hashem is the mashpia, the one that's giving. Knesset Yisrael is the makabel on the receiving end. But the ultimate shleimus is when the Eibishter and the Yidden become so one, so united kvayochol, that so to speak, the Knesset Yisrael doesn't have to receive from Hashem, but rather it's revealed how the Eibishter and the Yidden are all one. Says the Rebbe, this is hinted in the idea of the third month. What's the idea of three? The idea of three represents the combination and the yichud, that connection between the Elyon, the one up above, who is Echad, Hashem Echad. Then we have the number two, which represents that there's already a separate entity outside. That's what number two means. And number three is uniting one and two together, uniting the Eibishter and the Yidden together. Says the Rebbe, based on this, we could say that when the moon is full on the 14th and the 15th day of the third month, the Chodesh of Matan Torah, the day which is the day of the Chasana, that brings about the Shleimus, the ultimate of the marriage between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Knesset Yisrael, which is similar to the idea of the moon becoming similar to the sun, that the moon itself, which represents Knesset Yisrael, doesn't need, so to speak, anymore to be receiving from the sun. To receive from HaKadosh Baruch Hu is called Shemesh Havaya, because the Yidden themselves become, so to speak, like the sun. Again, the idea being the Yidden and Hashem are Kul Echad, are all one. A step deeper, says the Rebbe, this is emphasized in Kai Masira Bashlomusa, in the full moon, in the month of Kislev, the third of the winter months, even more than Chodesh Sivan, the third month of the summer months. Why is that? The difference between summer and winter is that in summer, the light of the sun is shining very, very strongly, much more than in the winter. The summer is the time of heat. The days are longer than the nights. That's what days are associated with. The winter is a time of cold and longer nights. And at least in the place which is considered the main one of all the lands, in Eretz HaKodesh, in the Holy Land. What does this mean in Avodah? That in the summer months, what's mainly being represented is the Gilui, the revelation of Shemesh Havaya, of godliness. Mulmayla lamata, from above to below. Whereas in the winter months is mainly emphasized the Avodah of the Yidden, which are compared to the moon. That's Mulmato lamayla. And therefore, when we have the Kai Masira Bashlomusa, the full moon in the summer months, in the third month of the summer months, in Sivon, since it's mainly coming because of the Gilui of Hashem, of the sun, so to speak, not so much because of the Avodah of the Yidden, at that point it's still noticeable some sort of difference between the Mashpia and the Makabel, between the sun and the moon, between Hashem and Bnei Yisrael. And therefore, it could still be that the Shleimus of the moon is still dependent because it's receiving from the sun. However, when we come to Kaim Asir of Ashlemusa of the third month of the winter months, since it's all about the Avodah of Yidden, the moon, here is emphasized the ultimate of the marriage of Matan Torah, that it's not anymore in a way of a Mashpia and Makabel, giver and receiver, but rather the Makabel, the recipient, becomes exactly like the Mashpia, the moon becoming like the sun, Yisrael and Kutchabrichel being all one. Says the Rebbe in Siv Ches, to add another point, that this is hinted also in the name Kislev, the special name of this third month of the winter months. What's the idea of Kislev? Says the Rebbe, Kislev is made up of two words, Kes, Loy. Kes means covering, concealment, hidden. Loy, which is 36, is the same gematria as the word Eile, which means these. Which number one, Eile you could point to with your finger. It means something is revealed, as opposed to Kes, which is concealed. Eile is revealed. 36 is also 6 times 6. Which represents the midos, how each one includes the other, and so on. So the combination between these two ideas of kes and loy represents this combination between the concealment and the revelation. In other words, that level of the etzem, of the essence, which is usually concealed to the recipient, and now it's completely revealed because there's no longer a giver and a receiver, but rather they became literally one. Says the Rebbe, this is emphasized in the Yom Tov at the very end of Chodesh Kislev, the Yom Tov of Chanukah, that even though it's at the end of the month, when the light of the moon is getting smaller and smaller, but what do we emphasize in Chanukah? The idea in a clear way of Moisevoy, ever increasing light. The first day we light 1 candle, the second 2, etc. That every single day there's more and more light, which represents and emphasizes the idea that the diminishing of the light of the moon, that's only as far as in level of oil. That's becoming smaller because we're getting closer to the essence, so in the light is getting smaller. But as far as the real revelation, actually every day is getting more and more, and that's why we have a second candle and a third candle and so on, representing the concept that as far as the etzem is concerned, there's more and more light. Says the Rebbe, now we can understand the reason why the kviyus, the setup of Rosh Hashanah of Toras Achsidus, this Chag HaChagim, is not like the other Yomim Tovim, which are connected to the full moon, but just the opposite, it's after the moon is complete. The special mile of Rosh Hashanah, Matan Torah of Toras Achsidus, this Chag HaChagim, in which started the revelation of the Torah of Mashiach, the secrets of the Torah. The Torah that's going to be given when Mashiach comes through by Hashem himself, those extra dimensions of Torah, completely incomparable to the revelation that was a Matan Torah, as that Azal tells us that the Torah that a person learns these days is like hevel, it's like air, complete, compared to the Torah of Mashiach. One of the main chidushim that's going to happen when Mashiach comes, compared to the Matan level of Torah, that was by Matan Torah, is this idea of marriage. The Medrash tells us, a marshal of a king, that was Makadesh, a woman. He wrote to her a certain amount of presents, but still, relatively speaking, little presents. But now when he's going to marry her fully, he writes her many, many presents, like a husband. So too says the Medrash, this world is like the Eirison, the beginning stage of that marriage. As the Pasuk says, Ve'eirastich li lo'olam, but the Eibishter only gave us the moon. As the Pasuk says, Achodesh hazeh lochem. But Yemoisa Mashiach, that's when it's going to be the full marriage, as the Pasuk says, Kiboy alayich esayich. And at that time, the Eibishter is going to give Yidden everything. As the Pasuk says, V'maskilim yazhiru, the intellectual ones are going to shine like the brightness of the sky. They're going to shine like the stars forever. In other words, the main union between Knesset Yisrael and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, where they become one. The marriage is when Mashiach comes, when will be fulfilled the promise that the moon is going to be like the sun. Again, not only that the Yidden are going to be like the moon that's receiving from the sun, as we said before, the moon was given to the Yidden already, but rather they become like the sun. The Eibishter is giving them everything, including the sun, because what's revealed is how Yidden and the Eibishter are all one. Says the Rebbe V'yesh Loimar, that this is hinted in the fact that Rosh Hashanah, Matan Torah, Toras Achsidus, the beginning of this marriage that's going to happen when Yemei Mashiach comes after the moon is complete, which hints to the idea that we have already the completion of the moon after and in addition to all that are received the light from the sun completely. Now it's getting even closer to the sun to become completely united, to become very similar to the sun, as we said that the moon is going to be just like the sun. More specifically, the Kviyus on Tuesday, on the third day of the week, which gets its bracha from Shabbos, which we said comes out on Tez Zayin Kislev. That's the day when the moon is starting to get closer to the sun to become like the sun, after having prepared and being ready for all of this, when the moon was full on Erev Shabbos, just between Yudalad and Tezvav Kislev, and then From these days, we go from the Tuesday of Yitzchak Kislev going into the fourth day of the week, because on the third day of the week, as we said, is also connected to the whole idea of Matan Torah of number 3. It says twice Ki Toiv, which is Toiv l'Shamayim, Toiv for heaven, and Toiv l'Brius for the people, which is the Chibur, the combination between the Elyon and Tachton, Shamayim and Brius, the Mashpi and the Makabel, the sun and the moon, that become one. Then what happens on the Wednesday of creation, on the fourth day of creation? That's the day that the two great luminaries are suspended in the sky, that the moon is no longer just receiving from the sun, but as we said, they're both actually the same and equal. Keser echad l'shneim. Finally, from there we move on to the Thursday, to the fifth day of creation, where the Eibishter blesses all living things, all the animals, and then on the sixth day where it says Ki Toiv and Toiv Moed. Says the Rebbe in Sif Yud, we can connect all of this to the Parsha Shavua, the Parsha of Erev Shabbos, and the Parsha of Shabbos, Parsha of Vayishlach, as well as the Parsha of the third and the fourth day, that is Yutes and Chav Kislev, which we're going into. The Parsha of Vayeshev, which we start reading in Mincha of Shabbos, Parsha of Vayishlach. The Chiddush of the Avodah of Yaakov in Parsha is Vayishlach. Vayishlach Yaakov and Vayeshev, Vayeshev Yaakov. Compared to the Avodah of Yaakov in the Parshas of Vayetze and Toldos, Vayetze Yaakov and Toldos is Eile, Toldos, Yitzchak, the birth, the children of Yitzchak, which as Rashi explains, referring to Yaakov and Esav, which are mentioned in the Parsha. So in Parshas Vayishlach and Vayeshev, this is already at the completion of the avodah of the birurim, of all the refinement, of all the elevations that Yaakov was doing, both with Lavan and with Esav, to the extent that Yaakov is prepared already for the state of Yemois HaMashiach. And this is why Vayishlach Yaakov Malachim Lofanav, Yaakov is sending messengers to Esav, his brother, in the land of Seir. As Chassidus explains, he's sending a message to him to tell him that the avodah is complete. All of the different levels were elevated, and now is the time, let's go together to the Geula. As he says, I'll come to my master in Seir, which is of course going to be when Mashiach comes, as it says in the end of the Haftarah of Parshas Vayishlach, so that's Parshas Vayishlach. Parshas Vayeshev starts off, Rashi tells us, Yaakov Avinu wanted to sit in peace and tranquility. And he has some peace until it starts the whole story with Yosef. Then again he has peace and tranquility in the land of Mitzrayim, which is from age 131 till age 147 of his life, until finally there's going to be the ultimate peace and tranquility when Mashiach comes, when there's going to be also the perfect pod of V'sholem Nafshi, as the Mittel Rebbe explains, that the real pod of V'sholem Nafshi is going to be when Mashiach comes, even greater than it was in the times of David and Shlomo. So the difference between the way Yaakov was when he's involved in all of these birurim, to the way he is at the end of the birurim, that he's ready for Mashiach, is similar to the difference between the way the moon is receiving from the sun and the moon, and the way they are when they're completely equal. Yaakov is compared to the moon. Yaakov is called HaMoira Koton. He's compared to the Moira Koton, to the small luminary. Yaakov is called Koton. As it says, Miyokum Yaakov Ki Kotonhu. It's specifically because Yaakov is the Koton, that's why he counts. According to the Koton, the smaller one counts according to the smaller one, to the moon, based on what it's known as the diminishing of the light of the moon, which the Eibishter said to the moon, go make yourself smaller. Become the Moira Koton, is because it starts over the whole spiritual thing. First, there's something called Shviras HaKelim, the breaking of the vessels in the world of Toyu, which sparks of Kedusha had fallen down. And that's why that's also caused that the level of Malchus, the Levana, should go down, and now is only a recipient. It has to go down into the lower worlds of Bria, Yitzira, Asiyah, to deal with these sparks of Olam HaToyu, to elevate them. So what comes out is that the state of the moon needing to receive from the sun is all related to this idea of elevating the sparks. But when all of the sparks are finished being elevated, the moon won't be a recipient anymore. Rather, we're going to go back to the state of the moon being like the sun, the two great luminaries. Says the Rebbe, all of this is hinted also in Parshas Vayishlach, where it says, Vayishlach Yaakov Malachim Lofanav Esav Achiv. Yaakov sends messenger in front of him to his brother Esav. Yaakov is rooted in the world of Tikkun. He sends Malachim Lefanav. What does Lefanav mean? In front of him could also represent before, meaning higher than him, to a level that's even higher than himself. To Esav, his brother, who's rooted in a higher world, in the world of Toyu. Since it is specifically through Yaakov and Esav connecting, that Yaakov is trying to elevate Esav, he's bringing Esav back to his high level in the world of Toyu. In order to draw down these great levels of Toyu down into Tikkun, so that the great levels of Toya, which are usually removed and beyond, should be able to come in an internalized way, and in that way the makif, that level that's usually encompassing and surrounding, should be able to internalize itself, and they can become united together. This is the same idea of the sun and the moon coming together. Yaakov and Esav. Yaakov representing the Oyer Pnimi, the internal Oyer, and Esav representing a more surrounding and encompassing Oyer, Mamalik Kalaman and Soivav Kalaman. Till finally, the moon doesn't need to receive the light from the sun because all the birurim of those sparks are all been completed. And as we said, that's why the moon had to get smaller in order to be a makabel, but rather it comes to the stage where the light of the moon becomes like the light of the sun, that they become both exactly equal. Says the Rebbe in Seif Yud Aleph, all of this is especially emphasized in this generation. But by first prefacing, that even though as far as Yaakov was concerned, everything was finished being done already when Vayishlach Yaakov, and the Gula should have been already then, as far as Yaakov was concerned. That's why Yaakov is sending Malachim to Esav to say it's time already for Olu Mashim Bar Tzion, Lishpet to Esav, and Yaakov wanted to sit in peace and tranquility. Nevertheless, practically, that didn't happen yet because of where the world was standing at the time. But, says the Rebbe, after all of our avodah of the Yidden throughout all the generations, including also, and specifically after the Gilu of Teiris Achsidus on Yutis Kislev, when it started the main union of Yifutzuman Tzachal Chutzah, and ever increasing every single generation through Rabbi Seinu Nesienu, all the way up until Kvoit Kedushas Moiri V'chami Admur Nesiderenu, to my father-in-law the Rebbe, through whom this Chassidus was spread to all parts of the world. So by now, all of the inyanim were already complete, even as far as the world is concerned, as the Rebbe had announced already so many times that all the matters of avodah have been complete, including polishing the buttons, and that everything is ready for the coming of Mashiach. From this we understand that the continuation of avodah that we're doing afterwards, as long as Mashiach Tzidkenu is being delayed for whatever reason, which is completely not understood at all, is no longer the avodah of birurim, because this avodah of birurim has been completed already. Rather, we're holding now by a special avodah to bring the Izgalus, the revelation, practically into the world. Says the Rebbe, this special mile of this generation is hinted in the Haftorah of Parshas Vayishlach. The Pasuk says, Vaya Beis Yaakov Eish, the house of Yaakov will be a fire. Beis Yosef, the house of Yosef, Lahava, the flame. Beis Esav, the house of Esav, Lakash, the straw. And then it goes on to speak about V'yorshu HaNegev HaResav, they're going to inherit all these places in the Golos, all the way until Tsarfas, which is France, mentioned in the Haftorah. And as the pasuk goes on, Yorshu HaNegev, Olu Mishim Bar Tzion, Lishpet HaResav. What does this all mean to us? One of the chidushim of Yosef, of our generation, and the hemshech of Beis Yosef of our generation. So Yosef, the Rebbe, is of course referring to the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Kvoit Kedushas Moiri V'chami Admur Nesidoi Reinu, whose first name is Yosef. And then, as the Rebbe also says, Beis Yosef, the household of Yosef. The Chiddush compared to previous generations, all the way even to the time of the Alter Rebbe, who the Rebbe is over here comparing to Beis Yaakov, Beis Yosef being the Frierdiker Rebbe, Beis Yaakov being the Alter Rebbe. Again, in the footnote, the Rebbe points out of special connections between the Alter Rebbe and Yaakov. But in this generation specifically, we had the spreading of Chassidus to all corners of the world, literally, to the most distant places. An example for this the Rebbe brings is the pasuk mentioned in the Haftorah, Tsarfas, France. In the time of the Alter Rebbe and the other Rebbeim, there wasn't so much the gilui of spreading of Chassidus in France, because this was considered the lowliest place, to the extent that the Alter Rebbe was concerned that France shouldn't win the war against Russia. And it's specifically in our generation, through Beis Yosef, there becomes the gilui, the revelation, the spreading of Chassidus, even in France, by founding over there a yeshiva of Toim Chetmimim, similar to Lubavitch. And therefore now already comes the time, as the pasuk goes on to say, Yorshu Esari HaNegev, V'olu Moishim Bar Tzion, Lishpoit Es HaResav. Says the Rebbe, we could add and to point out that the word Sarfas, which is France, is the same gematria, 770. That's the gematria of 770, which is the shleimus, the ultimate and the perfect of the number 7, as each one of the 7 includes 10, is made up of 10, which would be 70, and also as each one is made up of 100, which would be 700, and putting them both together, 770. What does this represent? This hints that by refining this place of Tsarfas, which is 770, with this we completed refining and elevating the whole world, which is created through the 7 midos called the Shiva Simei Abinyan, down to every single last little detail. Says the Rebbe Ulahoyren to point out that the birur, the elevation of Tsarfas, which we said is 770, is happening through the flame that shines from Beis Yosef to Beis Yosef in the literal sense, the house in which the Frierdiker Rebbe lived in the last 10 years in this world. And from there, it continues spreading and ever increasing the avodah of Beis Yosef, which this house is also, of course, the house is the number of 770. On a deeper level, Tzorfas is also the same letters of the word Paratzto, which represents that the Gilui of spreading Chassidus in Tzorfas, in France, is Paratzto, breaking all the boundaries, all the fences and all the gates, not only in a way that as a result of breaking down the boundaries, the well springs are also reaching to the lowest place, but furthermore, it's even in the lowest place itself, you have the Gilui of Chassidus, as you said, Tzorfas itself equals Paratzto. And through that, this Paratzto, as the Pasuk says, Paratzto alecha paretz in Parshas Vayishlach, speaks about how parrots came out, strongly bursting out, which refers, parrots referring to Mashiach, as the Pasuk says, Allah ha-paretz lefaneim. Says the Rebbe in our generation itself, it's even more emphasized when when we have the 15th day of the month of Kislev in this year. It's known and publicized the Rosh Hashanah of this year that the Rebbe is saying the Sicha Hoyetesh Nas Neflois Bo, and it's also the year of Neflois Bakoil, as Bakoil Mikol Koil. That means this is a year that it itself and all of the matters in it are in the way of miracles, Pella, which is even higher than a Nes, and Plois in the plural, and Niflois representing Nun, 50. Nun ploys, and first and foremost, the niflois, that is the pasuk refers to it, Kimitzeis Chomeretz Mitzrayim. Arenu niflois, I'm going to show you miracles like in the time of going out of Mitzrayim, and in fact, miraculous even compared to the time of going out of Mitzrayim. Within this year itself, we have already the full moon of the third month, which is a shleimus of 3 months, and 3 times we have a chazakah. We're standing close to the third day. That Tuesday of the third month of Matan Torah of Torah Chassidus, the beginning of the Gilui of the Torah of Mashiach, in which we have the marriage of the Eibishter and the Yidden in a way that the light of the moon is similar to the light of the sun. Ulahoyer says to point out that this idea is emphasized also in the fact that this year is a complete year, where Cheshvan and Kislev both have 30 days. So we have 3 months that are complete 30 days in a row, Tishrei, Cheshvan, and Kislev. It's also a Shana Tamima because it was a leap year. It's called a whole year. It's an extra Tamimus because we have that extra month. Says the Rebbe Yeshloima, we could say that in a complete year, when we have the completion of Cheshvan and Kislev, emphasizes even more this idea that the moon becoming complete as, first of all, as receiving from the sun. But then when we move on to the next stage, that is a Shana Tamima, there's the extra month, there's an extra whole month, it's emphasizing the idea that now the moon becomes like the sun, because what does the extra month supposed to do? It's supposed to make equal the solar cycle and the lunar cycle, similar to the idea of the moon becoming like the sun. Says the Rebbe, Vayishlach, that we could connect this with the Maimorim, the Drushei Chasana, that the Frierdiker Rebbe said, that were just reprinted and with extra explanation. And in the footnote, the Rebbe actually says, in 110, that these Maimorim were said in connection to the Chasana of Beis Yosef, of the household of Yosef, in the year Tov Reish Peites. Of course, referring to the Rebbe's Chasana. The Rebbe is the family, the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin, is the family of the Frierdiker Rebbe. So this Maimorim were said in connection to Beis Yosef. And these are Maimorim that are Maimorim and Chassidus that are connected to Chasana, and which is emphasized even more so this idea, the Chasana between the Yidden and Hashem by Yemoisa Mashiach, when we'll have the Ikra and the Shleimus HaGilui of Torah Chadashim Iti Teitzei. Also to point out, what says also in the footnote over here, how the Rebbe actually gave out that year the Kuntres Drushei Chasana to everyone, along with $2 to give to Tzedakah. Says the Rebbe, from all of this we understand that these days, all we have to do is open our eyes and see the Metzias, the practical Metzias, B'poil Mamish. And as the Rebbe says again in the footnote, not only that we've completed the Avodah, but rather that it's here already and we only need to open our eyes, so that we open our eyes and we see that we're sitting already together with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yisrael v'kutsha brichu kul echad, in the Shulchan Aruch, in that set table by the Su'udas HaNisuin, by the marriage of the Eibishter and the Yidden, by the Su'udah of the Levyasan and the Sheirabor and the Yayin HaMeshumor, at the end of which the Eibishter says to David HaMelech, to David Malchus Mashiach, take the Kosh Shel Bracha and bench. And David HaMelech says, yes, I will bench. It's appropriate that I should bench. And it says, Kosh Yeshuas Eso V'Shem Hashem Ekra. Just want to go back also to one footnote when mentioning before the idea that the Frierdiker Rebbe gave the Drushei Chasana in connection to the Rebbe's Chasana in Tov Reish Peites. There's a footnote on the bottom of the connection between Tov Reish Peites back to that same word of Paratzto. because when you have the shleimus, the completion of the number 9 is each one of the 9 times 10 would be 90. And says the Rebbe, this is hinted the idea that in the Shnas HaTzadik we have the shleimus hanisuin of the Knesset Yisrael and of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and of the Eibishter. This is going back to the Tafresh Peites aspect of it. Says the Rebbe, V'maiso ha'ikar coming from Erev Shabbos, in which we have the full moon of Chodesh Kislev, complete, and continuing into Yom HaShabbos Kodesh, HaMotzoi Shabbos Kodesh, which we start the Yom Rishon. Why is it called Yom Echad? Because the Eibishter was the one and only in the world, which is Toiv Kislev, meaning Yud Zayin. 3 days, continuing 3 days of. Now each one has a special mile and a special Kedusha, then following into Chai, which is Erev Yutis Kislev. Especially coming to the Yud Mei Agul of Yutes and Chav Kislev, and then continuing into the following days, all the way to the days of Chanukah. We need to organize Chassidish Fabrengens in each and every place, in each and every country, in each and every city, in each and every neighborhood, and not only big Fabrengens in central and main places, but in each and every place, literally, including also that every single place the Fabrengen should become as if that is the Ikar, not even that another place is the main place, being Mashpia, and we are only being Makabel secondary. But rather, it should itself become a place of mashpia. Not only doesn't it take away from the ikar of another place, but on the contrary, that through this, every single place ends up gaining, because we know the concept of kinas soifrim tar b'chachma, the jealousy of Talmidei Chacham adds to the chachma, so that every single place becomes an ikar, and an ikar should be ikar, that doesn't need a received ashpah from another place, because rather each place becomes like the central place, similar to the moon becoming not only makabel, but becoming like the sun itself. Says the Rebbe, it's appropriate that each and every person should make fabrengens, and better yet 3 fabrengens, 3 times as a chazaka. And in the footnote, the Rebbe explains that means either one by yourself and two through your messengers, or by yourself participating in 3 fabrengens because they're in different times. The night of Yutis Kislev, the day of Yutis Kislev, the night going into Chav Kislev. So making fabrengens with your family, with your friends, with your acquaintances, and so on, in order to emphasize even more that every single person is also a mashpia, like the moon, that becomes like the sun. And as it says in regards to the Gula Vayishlach, that the parents come back because of the children, and these fabrengens should be inspiring each other, helping each other to add in the 3 areas of Torah, avoiding Gulus Chasodim, as the Chazal say on the Pasuk. Pod of Visholim Nafshi, that whoever is involved in Torah and avoiding Gulus Chasodim, is whoever is involved in Torah, G'nus Chasodim, and davens with the Tzibur, I count, it says the Eibishter, as if you redeemed me and my children from Golus. For not only as if you redeemed me, but practically, in a revealed way, redeeming Hashem and the Yidden, the Pashtas, that immediately, in the continuation of this Fabrengen, even before we daven Mincha, has already fulfilled the request of Yaakov. In the name of, and on behalf, and in the Shlichus Kvayachal of each and every Yid. Leishe b'shalva, to sit in peace and tranquility as we read in Mincha, should all be b'poyel b'gali, because already, before this, is fulfilled v'olam ha'shim ha'atzil, and lish b'sareis v'oisla Hashem ha'mlucha, and fulfilled ach tzadikim yeshu yisharim es panecha. In the 3rd Beis HaMikdash, we're going to have the big Fabrengen of the Chanukah's Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi, in the presence of all the Yidden. It says, Kol Yishvei Aleh, that's the time we're going to be having all the Yidden in Eretz Yisrael, even before Chanukah, and on Chanukah will add in an ever-increasing way, as the message of Chanukah, Moisev V'hoilech, B'shleimus HaGeula, in a way of Yelchu Michael Al Choyil, Yiroeh El Elikim B'tzion.